All right. Brutus, or Remarks on Eminent Orators, the Argument. This treatise was the fruit of Cicero's retirement during the remains of the Civil War in Africa and was composed in the form of a dialogue. It contains a few short but very masterly sketches of all the speakers who had flourished either in Greece or Rome, with any reputation of eloquence down to his own time, and as he generally touches the principal incidents of their lives, it will be considered by an attentive reader as a concealed epitome of the Roman history. The conference is supposed to have been held with Atticus and their common friend Brutus in Cicero's garden at Rome under the statue of Plato, whom he always admired and usually imitated in his dialogues. 1. When I had left Sicilia and arrived at Rhodes, word was brought me of the death of Hortensius. I was more affected with it than I believe was generally expected, for by the loss of my friend I saw myself forever deprived of the pleasure of his acquaintance and of our mutual intercourse of good offices. I likewise reflected with concern that the dignity of our college must suffer greatly by the decease of such an eminent augur. This reminded me that he was the person who first introduced me to the college, where he attested my qualification upon oath, and that it was he also who installed me as a member, so that I was bound by the constitution of the order to respect and honor him as a parent. My affliction was increased that in such a deplorable dearth of wise and virtuous citizens, this excellent man, my faithful associate in the service of the public, expired at the very time when the Commonwealth could least spare him, and when we had the greatest reason to regret the want of his prudence and authority. I can add very sincerely that in him I lamented the loss, not as most people imagined, of a dangerous rival who opposed my reputation, but of a generous associate who engaged with me in the pursuit of fame. For if we have instances in history, though in studies of less importance, that some distinguished poets have been greatly afflicted at the death of their contemporary bards, with what tender concern should I honor the memory of a man with whom it is more glorious to have disputed the prize of eloquence than never to have combated as an antagonist, especially as he was always so far from obstructing my endeavors, or I his, that on the contrary we mutually assisted each other with our credit and advice. But as he who had a perpetual run of felicity left the world at a happy moment for himself, though a most unfortunate one for his fellow citizens, and died when it would have been much easier for him to lament the miseries of his country than to assist it, after living in it as long as he could have lived with honor and reputation, we may indeed deplore his death as a heavy loss to us who survive him. If, however, we consider it merely as a personal event, we ought rather to congratulate his fate than to pity it, that as often as we revive the memory of this illustrious and truly happy man, we may appear at least to have as much affection for him as for ourselves. For if we only lament that we are no longer permitted to enjoy him, it must indeed be acknowledged that this is a heavy misfortune to us, which it, however, becomes us to support with moderation, lest our sorrow should be suspected to arise from motives of interest and not from friendship. But if we afflict ourselves on the supposition that he was the sufferer, we misconstrue an event which to him was certainly a very happy one. 2. If Hortensius were now living, he would probably regret many other advantages in common with his worthy fellow citizens. But when he beheld the forum, the great theater in which he used to exercise his genius, no longer accessible to that accomplished eloquence which could charm the ears of a Roman or a Grecian audience, he must have felt a pang of which none, or at least but few besides himself, could be susceptible. Even I indulge heartfelt anguish when I behold my country no longer supported by the talents, the wisdom, and the authority of law, the only weapons which I have learned to wield and to which I have long been accustomed and which are most suitable to the character of an illustrious citizen and of a virtuous and well-regulated state. But if there ever was a time when the authority of eloquence of an honest individual could have wrested their arms from the hands of the distracted fellow citizens, it was then when the proposal of a compromise of our mutual differences was rejected by the hasty imprudence of some and the timorous mistrust of others. Thus it happened, among other misfortunes of a more deplorable nature, that when my declining age, after a life spent in the service of the public, should have reposed in the peaceful harbor, not of an indolent and total inactivity, but of a moderate and honorable retirement, and when my eloquence was properly mellowed and had acquired its full maturity, thus it happened, I say, that recourse was then had to those fatal arms which the persons who had learned to use of them in honorable conquest could no longer employ to any salutary purpose. Those, therefore, appear to me to have enjoyed the fortunate and happy life of whatever state they were members, but especially in ours, who, together with their authority and reputation, either for their military or political services, are allowed to enjoy the advantages of philosophy, and the sole remembrance of them, in our present melancholy situation, was a pleasing relief to me when we lately happened to mention them in the course of conversation.